So welcome everyone to our B3 webinar, Keeping Your Expenses on a Tight Leash, with Jill Hendrix, owner of Fiction Addiction. We've muted all of you as you entered the webinar, so please use the chat function to ask your questions. We'll be monitoring the chat and asking Jill your questions. Now to introduce Jill. Jill Hendrix grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, and graduated from Yale University. She worked briefly in the editorial department of St. Martin's Press, and then for a series of internet startups in New York City, including Juno Online Services. The startup bug proved contagious, and she decided in 2001 to return home and open her own business, Fiction Addiction, which she has managed ever since. In 2009, she launched the successful Book Your Lunch author event program, which has brought best-selling authors like Ellen Hildebrand and Dorothea Benton Frank to Greenville and introduced readers to debut novelists like Beth Hoffman. She has served as the treasurer of the South Carolina Academy of Authors and as the president of the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. Okay, Jill, take it away.
All right, well, welcome everyone. I know some of you and others I hope to get to know better. I'll be at SIBA in September because it's right around the corner from my store in Spartanburg, so I hope you all will be there as well. And let's go ahead and get started. First of all, as Linda Marie said, I've been an entrepreneur for about 18 years, and most of that time I've unfortunately been completely stressed out by my bookstore's finances. I'm assuming that you all are also concerned about your finances, or you wouldn't have signed up for today's webinar. And so what I'd like you to do is in the chat box, if you haven't already gotten it open, go ahead and get it open and let me know how you're feeling about your finances. So if everything is completely smooth sailing, put in a number 1. If you're completely stressed out to the point of like, you know, it's affecting your health and your mental sanity, like that would be a 10. So somewhere between 1 and 10, go ahead and let everybody know, you know, how you're feeling, or if you want to just tell me privately, that's fine. You can change on the chat box to whether it's to everyone or just, you know, to a specific person. So with bookstores, we have a lot of financial issues. There's, you know, the stress of making payroll, of making your rent, of paying those huge vendor bills. You know, there's a particular one with 3 initials, PRH, that's like comes to mind. And of course, you know, there's the roller coaster ride of cash flow, especially if you're one of the more seasonal businesses. I know we have some people on today that are at the beach or in the mountains, and they maybe have a more seasonal curve than even my store does. And then of course, the problem of a lot of business owners is just working way too many hours for the amount of money that we're making. So hopefully we can address some of this pain and help you get out of this situation, because this was the situation I was in for a lot of years, and now I'm feeling a whole lot better, and I hope I can share that experience and journey with y'all today. So what changed for me? Basically, I was just so stressed out. I was like, it can't continue this way. It's not viable. And so I did really a lot of research into all the books and the tools that were out there. And I found some solutions that have really helped me take my financial stress down from a 10 down to about a 3. And I have a blog article about why 3 is a good place for me to be. I don't think I'd ever be like a 1, but 3 is much better than a 10. So yeah, I'm seeing in the chat that a lot of people are, you know, on the higher end, above a 5 on the stress. So hopefully we can help you solve some of that today. So this is kind of my new mission, is sharing my knowledge so about this topic and trying to help other people resolve these issues, because I really don't think that entrepreneurship has to be a synonym for stress. And so I'm hoping to help everybody else who's in the boat that I was. So I've done, I did a talk at Eureka SIBA the very first year in 2018 about profit. I'm doing this webinar, and I've started a blog and a website at jillhendrix.com. And I'd love y'all to sign up if you're not already on my mailing list. And we'll be sharing some information about how to do that. Okay, so why did I pick this topic, keep your expenses on a tight leash, when Linda Marie asked me to do this webinar? So there's this rule of thumb called Parkinson's Law, that work expands to fill the time that you give it. So if you have a presentation due in a month, you're going to work on it a lot more than if you have a presentation that's due like tomorrow. Like you're just going to, you know, do the best that you can in the time that you have. And so we see this a lot in all different aspects. It's actually a physical law of thermodynamics that, you know, everything is trying to break down. So your expenses are just going to expand to consume all your available cash unless you have a system to keep them in check. So the idea is that, you know, if you don't have system, if you don't have order, everything in the universe is sort of decaying into disorder if you let it. So the same thing happens with your expenses, that they're just going to, you know, you're gonna, if you don't have a system, you get really busy and you can't pay attention, and all of a sudden you say yes to things you shouldn't have been saying yes to, and you have no more cash. So we're going to work on how to keep that from happening today. And that way everybody will have a profitable business going forward. So hopefully y'all are excited about this. So the system I'm going to give you in today's webinar was inspired by the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller. And in that book, I learned that dominoes are small but mighty. So I've never really done anything with dominoes before, but it turns out that a domino can knock over another domino that is 50% bigger than it is. So that is a system of exponential growth. You can start with a 2-inch domino, and then by domino 8, the domino you get that is being knocked over could be 3 feet tall. So you could start with a little tiny domino, and by, you know, 8 more, if each one is 50% bigger, you're at like 3 feet tall. So I promise no math in this webinar, but if anybody wants to do a little bit of math, you can try and figure out how many dominoes you think it would take for you to be taller than Mount Everest if we kept going with this little pattern. And everybody can guess in the chat box if you want, and then I will tell you what the answer is, if I can see my notes. I might have to move things a little bit to like see my notes. Okay, so I've written that down, and I will tell you the answer once we get some people guessing. So what we're going to do in this webinar is we're going to start with our first domino, mindset shift, and that's going to be our smallest domino. And then we're going to talk about profit first, focused intention, storytelling, and throttle down to go big. So each of these dominoes is going to get a little bit larger, but we're going to start small, and as you go, if you do these quick wins, you're going to build up the momentum that you'll need to tackle the bigger dominoes. So that's kind of the structure for today. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to accomplish in the webinar, that by the end of the webinar, I want you to know how to cut your business expenses without jeopardizing your profit. I want you to feel confident about your financial decisions, even if you hate math. I want you to have a list of quick wins that you can implement quickly to get you going. And I want you to begin to feel more in control of your business rather than your business controlling you. And of course, I want you to feel less stressed out by your business finances. Is everyone good with this? Do these outcomes sound good to you? I hope so. Okay. So the first domino is the mindset shift. Oh, right. I was going to tell you about how many dominoes it takes to get to Mount Everest. Did anybody want to guess before I tell you? Or should I just go ahead and announce it? I'll give you a few seconds while I take a sip of water since I'm like about to die here. So Annie thinks it takes 2 million dominoes to get to Mount Everest. You guys are like way too high here. No, not 10 million. Wanda says 44, she's closer. It's 57 dominoes to get to Mount Everest if you start with a 2-inch domino. So that's the power of exponential growth. So we're gonna try and get this exponential curve going for everybody. Okay, so the first domino is mindset shift. And I really have been inspired by all the recent scientific work in the field of positive psychology. And I think that this quote that I've put up here by the Chernovs is really true, that the greatest conflict always resides in your mind first. You are what you think. You can't change anything if you can't change your thinking. So, you know, this really doesn't require, you know, any action at all to change your thinking. You don't need any money to do it. You don't need to go learn a new skill. It's really just paying attention to your thoughts and to the stories that you are telling yourself, and then realizing that this is just one story. It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, what you think it means. So that's what we're going to talk about first, is mindset shift. So, the first mindset shift I need you to do is to envision success. So I want you to believe me that you can implement the material I'm going to share with you today. So I want you to take a moment to focus in on what succeeding at keeping your expenses under control would look like for you. And then once you can focus in on that outcome, like, what is it that you feel? What is it that you're seeing? Just sit here and think about that for a minute. If you were successful in this, if you kept your expenses under a tight leash, what would that really mean to you in the future? And then type that into the chat box about how you would feel or what that would look like. So confidence, relief, other feelings that you would have. Growth, less stress. You could focus your energy on creativity and creating. And everything would be sustainable. Great. So that is a great vision of the future. So let's figure out how we get there. Okay, so then the second mindset shift that I want us to make is our attitude towards money. So if you think that the word expense is a negative word, then type yes in the chat box. Or if you don't think that it's negative, just type no in the chat box. I want to do kind of an informal survey and see where people are about their attitudes towards money. Cool. So it looks like y'all have already kind of made this mindset shift yourself, because everybody's typing no in. So I agree that that expense is not necessarily negative. Instead, money is just a tool to reach your goal. And so I think that when people think that expense is negative, it's because they have a goal of money in and of itself. So if your whole goal is just to accumulate money, then expenses are obviously negative, because they're going to take money away from, you know, what you have. But if your goal is higher than that, if you have a goal besides just money, then you know, money is just a tool to get you there. And so what we're going to learn is that, you know, our expenses are not, you know, good or bad in and of themselves, that we really have to evaluate them against our goals, because what an expense that might be good for one business is not necessarily good for another one, depending on what each business's goals are. So cool. We are already done with our first domino, and I have a quick win at the end of each section. So the first quick win is to brainstorm your current business goals. If you have a business plan, you can pull that out and review it. Otherwise, you can just, you know, brainstorm from a blank slate. And then the idea is to narrow down to 1 to 3 goals for the year and write them on a Post-it note and attach it to your work monitor. Or I have a little journal I use at work, and so my goals are on there. And my goals for this year are to simplify and to systematize, because I'm trying to take a 3-week vacation in July. And so I need to have systems in place so that my employees can handle things in my absence. So why is just writing down your goals a quick win? So if you were on Cindy Dash's time management webinar that Siba did, she explained that every 1 minute of planning can save you 15 minutes of doing. And we can see that here. Just taking a simple minute to think about a goal you have for your business will really help you later in the evaluation stage when we get to that in the 4th or the 5th domino. So a goal just expresses a purpose for your business. It leads to clarity and to faster, more confident decision making. And there was a recent, actually not very recent anymore, a 2008 study that shows that simply writing down your goals makes you 39.5% more likely to achieve them. So it's really important to just have some time to sit there and think about what you're trying to accomplish. We get so caught up in actually doing things and, you know, helping customers and you know, all our emails and all the things that we don't sit down and make sure that we have a roadmap for where we're trying to go. And then we're surprised when we don't actually get there. So I think it's really important to write down your goals, and this is a quick win. So our next domino is Profit First. So Profit First is a system created by the business author Mike Michalowicz. He has a book called Profit First that you can get from PRH. And this is the easiest system I know to counter Parkinson's law. So the basic idea is that you simply take your profit first off the top of your income. And so now you have less money, less cash for your expenses to consume. And so now entropy is working in your favor and is forcing your expenses to contract instead of to expand. So the quick win here is that I'm going to give you an easy way to get into the Profit First system. So what I would suggest doing is just opening a new account at your bank, either a checking or a savings, whatever is easiest, you know, has the least number of fees. And then I think here we're all brick and mortar businesses, so we all take cash and checks, I'm assuming. So every time you do your cash and check deposit, all you would do is simply also fill in a transfer slip at the same time and take 2% of that money and put it into that new account that you just opened. And then you do this for 3 months, and then the next quarter you'd increase that to 1%. So it would be like 3% that you would be transferring over. And then I would challenge you not to touch your money at all in that new account until you read the book Profit First. So the whole system is a little more complicated than I've said here, but the idea of this is to get you started and to make you realize that, you know, that you can make a profit in your business and that you really won't miss that 2%. But then as you increase it by 1% each quarter, that's going to force us to take some other actions because eventually you will be squeezing your expenses too much. So I said in the last slide that writing down your goal gives you a success rate of 39.5% more. Well, it turns out that if you also use an accountability partner, that you can jump that success rate even higher to 76.7%. So I would like to challenge you to, you know, make a commitment to someone else on the webinar that you're going to implement, like, you know, these quick wins, that you're going to implement this idea of the 2% transfers. So if you're friends with someone else on the webinar, you know, that would be a good way to discuss it afterwards and use each other as an accountability partner. Or I'm sure Linda Marie or I would be happy to be your accountability partner. Just let us know. Or you can also just use your calendar. So you can put a reminder in to your calendar from about a week from today, asking yourself if you talked to the bank yet. So those are my suggestions for how to get, you know, moving with the activities that we're going to be talking about today. So Profit First, the idea is that, you know, you're going to take your profit off the top, so it's guaranteed. This is similar to the personal finance idea of paying yourself first. And the idea is that it's such a small amount that you're just not going to miss it. But as that number does increase over time, because each quarter we're going to ask you to do 1% more, then it is going to force you to implement our next domino, which is focused intention. So Focused intention, I really believe that, you know, what you focus on, what you give attention to really matters. And thus you have that old proverb, be careful what you wish for, you'll probably get it. So the idea here is that we want to be intentional about our focus, and we want to really prune our spending, which is what the, you know, the topic of this webinar is. So we were talking earlier about, like at the beginning, about how things change. Remainders, we were talking about remainders with George, and there was other stuff, and the business just always changes. Like I've been in it 18 years. I've gone from being a used bookstore to a completely new bookstore to having, you know, this Book Your Lunch program, and now we do things in the store more. So I feel like the only certainty in life is change. And when we're going to prune our spending, what we're doing is really shaping the future of our business. We're going to decide what our goals are and then make sure our spending is aligned with those goals. So as I said, things change, goals change. So just because you had an expense, you know, it doesn't mean that you were wrong to have that expense. It just might mean that things have changed and that you're taking a different direction with your business now, and that it doesn't make sense any longer. And so it'll be time to prune that expense. So pruning is just a tool. It's not any sort of judgment on yourself or past decisions that you've made. So the reason that we need to prune our spending is because if we're taking the profit off the top, but we don't change anything else about what we've been doing, then we could accidentally go into debt if we're not paying attention. So that's why the 2% off the top is ensuring that you're going to have some profit, but then the pruning ensures that that profit doesn't get eaten up by debt. So that's the point of the pruning. So my quick win for this section would be for us to create a repeating calendar entry in your Google Calendar to called Prune My Expenses, and set that for like every 6 months. I would put the first one for about 2 months from today. You know, give yourself 3 or 4 hours to do it. And then, you know, make yourself a written commitment, because that improves, you know, your chances of following through. So just, you know, promise me that you'll do it. Everybody willing? Anybody want to commit publicly in the chat box that you're willing to like actually implement the stuff in the webinar and prune your expenses? Go ahead and type in. Oh, good. We have a couple of people. Great. Deanna and Tara. Awesome. So glad. Okay. So then domino 4 is storytelling. So one of the key elements that you're going to need in order to do your pruning is storytelling. Before we can evaluate an expense, we need to know why we took it on and what we're hoping to accomplish. So these questions are really at the root of any story that you tell. Why are my characters here, and what are they going to accomplish? So when we wrote down our business goals in, you know, quick win number 1, we were basically, you know, telling ourselves a story, what we were trying to accomplish. And this is what we're going to do for our expenses. We're going to write down the goals for our expenses. What is it that they are meant to accomplish? Everybody just has so much stuff on their demands on their time, so busy, that really the biggest struggle is simply bringing awareness to our actions. When you're really busy, it's easier just to let things go, just hand out that credit card and, you know, just get that, check that thing off your to-do list. Oh, so-and-so wants this, fine, here's the card, go buy it. But we really need to take some time with our expenses to think about what we're trying to accomplish with our business, and what expenses really make sense to accomplish those goals. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a framework for you so that it'll be easier for you to handle those questions as they come up, so that you don't have to, you know, have a huge thought process every time somebody asks you to spend something. But we're going to do some upfront planning to create some frameworks so that then it'll be easier for you to make those decisions, to be like, no, that doesn't make sense. I'm not going to approve that. Or sure, that sounds like a great thing to be spending our money on. It's totally going to advance our goal in this aspect. With the storytelling for your expenses, I'm not going to make you go through every single expense in your QuickBooks line by line. Instead, I've created some shortcuts. So we're going to sort our expenses into 4 houses, and each house has its own house motto, sort of like the houses in Hogwarts. So this is kind of the fun part of the presentation. So the first house is the house of protection. And the motto for this house is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so the expenses here are things like insurance. Can anyone else think of other expenses that would fall under the house of protection? If so, please go ahead and type them into the chat box. So actually, these type of expenses, they get a bad rap sometimes. Sometimes people are like, oh, I just keep paying out and out for insurance and I never get anything out of it. But they're actually, you know, the unsung heroes. So you really need to, a lot of times, fund these more than you are. And that's something that I'm working on too, is to do a little bit, get some information for people on insurance, because I feel like this is an aspect that I don't know as much about as I really do as to how much insurance you need or don't need and what different components. So the other protective expenses that people are mentioning are video cameras, yep, for security, paying for expert advice. That one, George, I might put in a different place, but we'll talk about that later. So other ones that I use are data backup, and basically anything that's going to protect you from catastrophe. So, you know, savings could even be a protective expense. So then my next category is rainmaking, the house of rainmaking. And their motto is, you got to spend money to make money. So examples of this would be rent, your inventory, advertising. These are expenses that can be directly tied to an income stream. So can anybody think of other expenses that are tied to an income stream for you that I haven't already mentioned? If so, go ahead and type them into the chat box for me. Does anybody have a website or another income stream? At Winter Institute, I roomed with someone who had a book trolley. So for her, you know, she has all sorts of expenses that are tied to that income stream that the rest of us don't have, like gas or other stuff. Yeah, so Annie said a podcast. I love listening to podcasts, but I haven't actually gotten up the gumption to do one myself yet. So, but if you do have one that you've got tied into an income stream, then all the expenses associated with that would definitely be rainmaking expenses. Okay, so our next house is the house of productivity. And so, George, this is where I would put you're paying for expert advice, because the house motto here is hire a specialist. So the idea is that these are usually tools or third parties that you can outsource, you know, your non-core work to. So what sorts of tools or experts are y'all using in your business? Go ahead and type in the chat and let me know. So we recently signed up for Above the Tree Line for the paid portion. I'd gotten a free trial from Penguin Random House for a year, and I decided that it really was productive enough to be worth the $25 a month. So that's one that we have. Other people have a bookkeeper, and we've just started with a bookkeeper as well. Nicole says QuickBooks. Yep. I've also just started with a payroll service as well as the QuickBooks. Nikki's saying graphic designers, definitely. So these are things that, you know, it would be faster to hire somebody else to do than it would be to do yourself. I know Kelly Justice at Fountain Bookstore has a rule that can't remember exactly how she phrases it, but something about if it's going to take her more than half an hour and it costs somebody else costs her less than $100 to hire somebody else, then that's when she decides to outsource. So our next house is the house of consumption, and the motto here is feed the beast. So the idea here is that these are items you consume in the process of doing business. So mostly it's supplies, paper, ink, staples, stuff like that, toilet paper. But, you know, I mean, technically, if you're printing a bunch of flyers in-house, then the paper and the ink for those could be considered a rainmaking expense. But I think most of us are too busy to nitpick with stuff like that. So I just, you know, I don't want to count the number of pages I spend, you know, printing a flyer or whatever. So I'm just lumping all of this stuff under the house of consumption. Okay, so the next quick win would simply be to sort your expenses. Now this is the part where you would pull out your QuickBooks report from last month and you would print a transaction detail report. And if you need any help figuring that out, you can just email me and I'll walk you through it. And then what I would do is I would simply, you know, categorize those expenses. Like start with the ones that you easily, you know, can identify, that you know your rent is a productivity expense. Yeah, Nicole, electric bills you could put either as a consumptive expense, or you can consider it part of rainmaking as part of, you know, having a store open for business so that you can sell your goods. So there is a little, you know, flexibility in where you put certain certain expenses, and you can categorize how it makes sense in your head. This is really a tool for you to use to make decisions in your business. So you want to do what makes sense in your head, not necessarily what I say. But the idea here is that, first of all, that you want to make sure you know what all of those expenses are on your QuickBooks for last month, and that, you know, you have some sort of sense of which category that each one would go in. And so, you know, you could do this as a, if you're open books with your company, if you're completely transparent, you could have a, you know, a sorting party at the store, and like everybody go through the like expenses and like who recognizes this one, you know, what house should that go in? Or else it can just be you or you and your bookkeeper or whoever it makes sense to kind of go through and figure out what you are actually spending your money on, and what, you know, is the gist of what it is supposed to be. So Wanda's asking, where do employee salaries go? So a lot of employee salaries for smaller stores are going to be almost entirely a rainmaking expense, because, you know, the employees are the ones that are doing the things that are making sales. They're the ones that are helping the customers. They're the ones that are putting the event promotion up, that sort of thing. In a bigger bookstore, you might have enough staff that you have some more in-house, behind-the-scenes people, like bookkeepers and that sort of thing, that are not directly tied to an income stream. In that case, they would go in, you know, probably under productivity, or hopefully you don't have any employees that are just, you know, complete dead weight and under the consumption house. So I would say that most employees are either rainmaking or they're in productivity. Okay. So then why is sorting valuable? So sorting is like a storytelling shortcut. Every expense house is kind of like the genre of a book. It gives you some basic rules about what the expense is meant to accomplish. So a romance novel usually has a happy ending. A protective expense is meant to protect you from catastrophes. So when we go on to Domino 5 and we create some evaluation criteria for your expenses, you're going to save a lot of time and energy by creating that criteria at the house level rather than having to do it for each individual expense. So this is what I was talking about having a framework that you can use to evaluate expenses in the future. Okay, does everyone feel like they have a lot of momentum behind them? You've envisioned success. We've started setting profit aside with quick win number 2. We've made a date with ourselves to regularly give our expenses our focused attention in quick win number 3. And we've sorted our expenses into 4 houses, so you know the genre of the story they're trying to tell in quick win number 4. And now we're going to get into the meat of how to throttle down to go big. So the key is evaluation. As I said at the beginning, most expenses are neutral in and of themselves. You would think that protective expenses would always be a good thing, but context always matters. A new business might not need as much insurance as a well-established business that has a lot of assets. Different businesses have different goals, and what is an expense that makes sense for one business is not going to make sense for another. So evaluation lets you look at the expense in the context of the goal to see if you're achieving what you hope for or not. Okay, so I hope this is not breaking news to any of y'all, but you cannot actually have it all. So life is about making decisions and trade-offs. As David Allen says, you can do anything, but not everything. The key though, when we're trying to make these decisions and trade-offs, is to focus on the positive. So instead of thinking about what you're giving up, instead you want to think about your goals from quick win number 1 and focus on what you want to go big on. Like, once you have that focus in your mind, we're going to work on eliminating or reducing everything else. So that's the throttle down portion. And then once you've throttled down the stuff that's not, you know, a priority for your goal, then you're going to have more resources, more time, more money, and more focus to go big towards your goals. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so in order to figure out this criteria system, we're going to start by using some extreme scenarios. So it's a lot easier to figure out decisions on the edges. So for each house of expenses, we're going to think of expenses you would be delighted to have. These are your hell yes scenarios. And then for each house, we're going to think about expenses that are no-brainers for you to turn down. And these are your hell no examples. So does anybody have a hell yes rainmaking expense that you would like to share with everybody? Something that you're happy to pay every time that it comes up? So y'all don't have anything that you're happy to pay for? What if you got asked to host Rick Riordan for an event, but you had to pay for an offsite venue? Would that be a yes? Oh my God, of course I would be happy to do that. And George is happy to pay his rent every month. Any other, you know, expenses that y'all just know are worth your time to pay, that you pay them and you get like a ton of profit, a ton of sales out of them? So salaries, so if you're really happy with your employees and you feel they're super productive. Wanda likes to pay credit card fees because it means she's making sales. Cool. And then what about some hell no examples? What are things that you just say no to all the time? So for me, it's anytime a student comes in and wants to sell me a yearbook ad. You know, I've tried those, they don't work at all for me. So that's an easy no. I'm just like, nope, sorry. You know, anything that's an easy no for the rest of you? Yeah, paper advertising is super expensive, so it's not always a good return on investment. And Wanda, like the rest of us, does not like cold calls. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take some of our examples that were hell yeses and hell nos, and we're going to figure out some criteria based on those examples. So we're going to figure out, using the hell no examples, some minimum criteria that an expense must pass. And then using your hell yes examples, we'll figure out some extreme criteria that would get you really excited to spend that money. And so I have an example here for rainmaking of how this might work. So your minimum criteria could be that it's a low monetary risk. So, you know, books are returnable. We're kind of used to that in most cases. So that like drops the risk down. If we're going to try a new author or we're going to order in books for an event, we know, you know, that we can return them usually. So that makes it a low monetary risk. For me, I like to have my everything tied to a long-term strategy rather than just a one-off event or a one-off, you know, kind of sale or product that I'm not sure I would be able to sell over the long term. It's a lot easier for me if I have some long-term strategies and I can create types of events or types of products that sell well rather than having to, you know, continually push for each different type of thing that I try. And then another minimum criteria is knowing how I'm going to monetize that expense. So like the podcast, I don't have a podcast, but if I did, I would want to know how I'm going to actually make money off of this free thing before I would classify that as a rainmaking expense. So I would have to have a plan for how to monetize. So Wanda was asking about an example of a one-off. So I guess that would be like if somebody comes in and asks me to carry a type of sideline I've never carried before, like, you know, candles maybe. We've never, so this is an example that came up at Christmas. Somebody asked me if I would carry candles. And we said yes. But after the fact, I realized that it wasn't really tied to any sort of sideline strategy that I had, that, you know, everything else that we have sidelines that does well for us is specifically book related, and the candles had really no book tie-in whatsoever. So whenever I stray from this, I've discovered that, you know, I get into trouble. So I like to have, you know, kind of a strategy behind the products I'm stocking, the events I'm trying to, you know, go after, rather than just evaluate them one-on-one. I want to think about how they're going to fit into the big picture of my store. And then for me, some extreme criteria would be, you know, can I easily track results? So for most things that's, you know, that are going to be sold through your point of sale, that's pretty straightforward. But where this comes in would be if you're going to be doing some advertising. Like, so we talked about paid advertising. And the reason that paid advertising can sometimes be a problem is because it can be hard to track your results. Like, you know, you spend all this money on this ad, but, you know, how do you know who came in because of it or not? You know, especially if you didn't use a coupon code or something like that. Another extreme criteria for me would be something that would bring in a lot of profit. So, you know, something that would bring in about $1,000 of revenue at my standard margins. So $450 worth of profit. That's kind of my daily break-even number. So that's where I kind of, you know, anything that's going to help me hit that daily break-even is great. And then another extreme criteria for me would be something that's repeatable. So something where, you know, I could put the investment up front to figure out how to market it, to figure out who to sell it to, and then I could repeat that over and over and over again. So those are just some examples. Your criteria could be completely different, but I just wanted to put some, you know, some concrete examples in here for you. So then the idea is that you would take some expenses and run them against those criteria and see if they succeed or fail. So some expenses will just, you know, not meet your minimums, and you'll be happy to say adios to them. So you just, like, it's easy, you say no, sorry, we don't do that. Not a problem, no yearbook ads. Others you could simply delay for a while until you maybe need to do some more research. You need to figure out what's causing the failure. You know, maybe, you know, you've bought a bunch of pins and you can't figure out where they're all going to. You can't figure out if the customers are stealing them, if the employees are stealing them, whatever. So you just put a halt on it, like, until you can get more data to evaluate what's going on. But other failures are going to require you to restructure your business in some way in order to do without the expense. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But first I wanted to tell you that this criteria system is not something I came up with all on my own. It's basically adapted from the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown, which is another great book that I highly recommend to everybody. So here's an example of restructuring. So we have decided to stop hosting non-local debut authors for events by themselves. So these events were failing 2 of our minimum criteria in that they weren't really tied to a long-term strategy. You know, we didn't really have a strategy around debut authors. Now that's my store. Your store might have a completely different strategy around debut authors. And so, you know, it might not be a failure of the criteria for you there. And then we couldn't figure out how to monetize them. They weren't bringing in enough attendees to even cover our cost of doing the promotion. Like, as everybody knows, doing an event, there's a lot of upfront, you know, promotion of working with the publicist to get everything and to write it up, you know, for your newsletter, your events calendar, your bag stuffer, your, you know, sign, ordering all the books in, returning all the books, everything there is to go into an event. So instead, we're going to try to restructure these events. So we're going to tell anybody who asks us, you know, to host a debut author to say that we're only doing them as panels, and to see if they have another author they want to put with them, or if, you know, we can bring in local authors to join them for a book, for a panel, or we're going to tie the author to another successful event we already do. So we have a quarterly book club party that we do that started out without any author event at all involvement. It was just me telling book clubs what to read. And then we've since added some smaller authors to it if we're, you know, if we wanted to host the author, but we didn't think they would do well just by themselves. We've hooked it onto the book club party. So that's an example of how you can take something that you've been doing that doesn't quite work and then tweak it a little bit and figure out how to make it work better for you. So how you can level it up to the next stage. Okay, so this process I've gone over really quickly, but it does take some time to go through. And so I wanted to create some resources for you to help you work through the process if you are interested in it. So I've created a Throttle Down to Go Big workbook that gives you examples from my store, 2 different sets of examples, so you can see this written out, you know, and study it kind of at your leisure. And so if you sign up for my email list, I will send it to you as a free welcome gift. And so this is the URL to sign up. And then we're also going to email you after the webinar, and so that you'll have all of this in an email, so you don't have to worry about writing it down right now. Okay. So as I said, like, really thinking about this criteria and doing your evaluations takes some time and some effort. This is your 5th domino. It's the biggest one. But the more you go through the process, the easier it becomes. And you can use this framework of the whole criteria framework for any kind of decision that you need to make, whether it's financial, whether it's about events, whether it's, you know, just what to work on today. You know, once you start using the framework, you'll find that it's really, really flexible. And I also think community can be really helpful in the process. And so I would consider involving your employees or creating a working group with other business owners to kind of, you know, ask for advice or to see what other people are doing with their evaluations. This is kind of a new concept, so it helps sometimes to work it through with other people. So y'all have made it all the way through the webinar so far. You've gotten to the biggest domino, and I think that if you implement those quick wins, you know, maybe 1 a week, that you can carry through and get the results that you really want, and that when you finally topple this domino, it will really be life-changing for you. So far, we've covered the magical expense sorting system, the need to have a vision and goals for your business, how to evaluate your expenses using very little math. I don't think I asked y'all to do any math, right? No math whatsoever. How community can be a key element in helping you make evaluations, and how to keep your profit up by dropping or restructuring those expenses that fail your criteria. So this is a lot. So knowing what you all know now, do you feel a little more comfortable thinking about your store's financials? Are you happy you attended the webinar today? And did the webinar give you a different perspective to consider on your finances? Can you see using what I showed you today to gain more control over your business? And even if you use just a tiny fraction of what I showed you, would you say our time together was well spent? So go ahead and give me some feedback in the chat box and let me know, you know, whether you think this has been useful. Cool. Okay, so for those who would like to go even deeper and further, I know that lasting change can be really hard. So as I'm sharing these resources with everybody at jillhendrix.com, I can just, you know, create the resources and let you have them on your own, like the workbook, to try and, you know, guide you. But I also think that I'd really like to be more active and help people a little more actively. And so this is the first people I'm telling about this opportunity that I am going to be doing some business coaching services. And I'm looking for some beta testers for this service. So everybody can get the workbook. That's for free at my, you know, when you sign up for the mailing list at that special link. But for the coaching, I'm going to offer 3 beta testers a chance to join for just $50 instead of the standard price of $150. So that's $100 off. And what you would get for that is 4 half-an-hour coaching calls over the course of a month. So a call per week. And I'm also offering a free discovery call if everybody wants to, you know, see what a coaching call would be like before they, you know, jump on the package offer to be a beta tester. So to do the discovery call, you would just go to my website, jillhendrix.com, and there's a work with me link, and that's got my scheduler for the discovery call. Right now, I've only got my schedule set up for Wednesdays. You know, there's so much stuff to do. So I carved out Wednesdays from the store, but if you can't make Wednesday, just let me know and I'll find another date or time that would work for you. And so that's my presentation. So Linda Marie's gonna send the follow-up email with all of the links, but if anybody has any questions right now, go ahead and let me know in the chat box.
Do you happen to have the link handy? We could possibly post it in the to everyone right now.
Yeah, let me see if I can figure out where that was. Okay, so for the workbook, it's here. It's this pages.jillhendrix.com/SIBA.
Jill?
Yes.
Would you like to, should we unmute folks so they can actually talk to you?
Sure, that would be fine.
Yeah. Can we unmute everyone at the same time, Linda Marie, or do folks need to unmute themselves?
I think Nikki might be able to do that.
Okay.
So I know I talked a little fast. I was trying to get it all in.
A list of the books that you mentioned, Jill Hendrix, if you'll send them to us, we'll do an Edelweiss collection of all the books you recommended, and we can send that out to everyone when we send the email with your stuff, if that's okay.
Yep, I'd be happy to.
Okay, great.
Somebody mentioned that with our Instagram, it hasn't been updated in months.
Mommy was supposed, she told me she was posting stuff.
Okay, are there any more questions?
Put something on there about June too.
Well, I guess we could end there. Thank you so much, Jill, for your presentation. It was really great.
Oh, you're very welcome. I enjoyed it.
And so everyone, we're going to be sending out that